I'm here with Mónica Guzmán. Mónica, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you are the author of a book called I Never Thought of It That Way: How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. And I'm going to hold it up here just in case some people are watching. So I wanted to get into why and how we're so polarized and what we can do about it. But what I thought we could start out with is if you can tell everyone a little bit about you and your background and maybe what motivated you to write this book.
So I've been a journalist my whole career, and I've taken very seriously the whole time this mission to help people understand each other. And I thought, oh yeah, the way to do that is go report, learn about people, tell their stories in the media, and that's going to be great. But over the last several years, it became pretty clear that things were fracturing so much across our society that simply telling stories in the media just kind of wasn't enough to help people understand each other, that there was this foundational brokenness, this lack of trust, this fraying of a fabric that is understandable considering the kind of trauma that that our society has been going through, but that we need to address head on. And so I knew I needed to step back from simply being part of the media and look at it a different way and see if I could address that base problem. But the personal reason that I wrote this book has to do with me and my family. So I am the daughter of Mexican. I'm a Mexican immigrant. My parents are Mexican immigrants, but I am liberal and voted for Biden and then Clinton before. And my parents are conservative and voted twice very enthusiastically for Donald Trump. We've been citizens since the year 2000. My parents took the citizenship test. We're really excited, and like we adopted this country as our own. And we've had intense political conversations that grew extraordinarily intense along with everybody else's in the 2015 presidential campaign. So the wild thing is we actually managed to have these really heated conversations. We're a very unfiltered family. Like we yell at the top of our lungs. You always know where you stand with my mother. We're not polite. That's not a thing. And yet we've gained understanding about each other and we've kept the relationship really strong. We don't agree, but we understand the reasons why we disagree. And that has made all the difference in the way that I look at the world and the way that they look at the world. So it was that contrast between, all right, somehow we've been able to do this. And so what can be learned? What is in our way as a broader society when it comes to trying to see the world through other people's eyes? Again, not to agree, but to just see where they're coming from. And that's why I wrote the book.
Beautiful. Your family is a microcosm of what we're experiencing on a more macro level, it seems like. And the lesson that you were able to walk away with from that is that I can still disagree with my family. We can have loud and heated arguments, but I can also love them and maintain a relationship with them at the same time. So just to add in here, I also can relate to that as well. I'm someone who's, liberal, has voted liberal my entire life. Both of my parents voted for Trump as well. So I think we have been going through a similar experience, and it's really taught me a lot. And my relationship with my parents is just as good as it's ever been. But that was with some conscious decision to maintain and keep our relationship strong despite our differences. So you point to some research in your book that describes three different types of polarization. And I think that we're experiencing all three, but one of them is ideological polarization. The other one is affective polarization. And then the third is perceived or false polarization. And if I'm understanding correctly, it seems like that third one maybe is like the most insidious one, or maybe they're all harmful. But can you describe maybe what this false perceived polarization is and why it's so harmful to our society?
Yeah, so there's been all kinds of social research into this, asking people on one side of the divide to guess at the views on the other side. And what keeps happening is that people exaggerate extreme views. People just get it wrong. We get these signals from the stories that circulate around us that the beliefs on the other side are more extreme, more threatening, more dangerous than they actually are. When you go and poll the other side, it turns out, no, the views are not that extreme at all. And so we are basically surrounded by misperceptions about what other people believe. So we believe that we disagree far more than we actually do. So that's just not seeing reality. And so we need to stop and ask why that's the case. It's certainly because of the stories being told in the media, sure. But it's also one of the other polarizations you mentioned, affective polarization. Affective polarization is polarization based on how we feel toward each other, how the two sides feel about each other. And there was a study that showed that each side of the political divide assumes that the other side despises them twice as much as they really do. So, one of the most reasonable reasons to hate somebody is because you think they hated you first. So that's also a problem, because as it turns out, as much as we want to believe that we are purely rational creatures, we're not. And our gut feel and our feel, all our feels are very, very instrumental in what we believe about the world, how we act upon those beliefs. So affective polarization, I would say, is actually the most insidious one, because the feelings are based on, it's a vicious cycle. We are afraid and we are suspicious, which leads us to lean toward assumptions about other people's beliefs that are not grounded on reality. But it also leans us toward fear and suspicion, which makes us not even want to approach the other side to find out what reality actually is.
Right. So those two things are feeding into one another. And your prescription, so to speak, or one of the things that we can do to help to bridge this divide is around curiosity. And that curiosity, it seems like, is helping to maybe offset some of that perceived or false polarization between us, because we're learning about one another. And as we do that, hopefully it decreases the affective polarization as well. But I'm curious, why do you think curiosity is maybe the most powerful ingredient and not something else like empathy or compassion or tolerance or something like that?
Yeah, what a great question. So empathy is great. Empathy is awesome. But empathy can also fall prey to the silos that we build and the fracturing of our society. When we are highly empathetic, it also can mean that we feel really good when the enemy is suffering. If we think that somebody is really causing a lot of harm, we're not necessarily empathetic toward them just because we tend to be empathetic. We'll be empathetic toward the groups we think are being harmed, and the people that we care for. So empathy by itself isn't enough. Curiosity is about putting doorstops in the hallways of your mind. When we're stressed and fearful and there's a lot of anxiety, it's perfectly understandable that we reach for what psychologists call NFC, need for closure. We want an answer. We want to know what's going on, because it's really uncomfortable to sit in so much uncertainty when things feel so threatening. So what we'll do is we'll tend to want to reach for the nearest answer and not allow uncertainty to stay open. The problem with that is, once you think you know, you won't think to ask. Curiosity kind of dies. Every time we make a conclusion, it kills 100 possible questions. So it's curiosity plus empathy. Curiosity plus empathy means I'm going to be empathetic, but I'm even going to be empathetic toward the people who I don't understand to such a degree that I'm afraid that they're harming my world. I'm even going to be empathetic enough to go and check it out, to ask some questions, to make sure that I am not assuming untruths. Because that's really what we're doing a lot of. Assumptions are a kind of certainty. They close our mind to questions as soon as we believe them. But assumptions are answers to questions we haven't even bothered to ask. We haven't asked it. Your brain just answered the question by itself. Well, those people are clearly so-and-so. Yeah, you sure? You sure about that? You know, what if you checked it out? What if the thought pieces you're reading online aren't really giving you the whole story?
Yeah. You were describing some research as well, and you were just alluding to this, how people that tend to be more empathic actually tend to have more animosity or hate towards people of the out group. And this is something that I've been observing so much, at least in recent years. I'm going to pick on people on the left a little bit because that's maybe where I fall, and that's just easiest to understand those brains. But so much of the work and the messaging that we're doing is seems like it's around empathy and compassion, but it also seems like that really just it falls short. It's within our own group, and it's so hard for people to extend that same empathy and compassion towards people who they don't like, people who hate them. And I mean, this is really what your message and Braver Angels is all about, is really trying to understand people on the other side. What would you say, or like, how can people, if you, let's just give the example of like I believe someone on the other side, thinks that I don't have the right, I don't deserve reproductive rights, or I don't deserve, rights as an LGBTQ person or something like that. You truly believe that the other person on the other side hates you and doesn't believe you should exist. How can I have empathy and compassion for that? Wouldn't that harm me? What would you say to that?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing to say to that is that there's no blanket prescription on any of this. Each of us is a completely different calculus of, difficulty level to approach other people. So depending on your identity, the beliefs, your attachments, how much meaning, you derive from your positions and perspectives, of course, it's going to be next to impossible to talk to somebody that is really, really far on the other side. As I put it fairly crassly, just to release tension in some of these conversations, you don't have to talk to a Nazi tomorrow. That's not the ask. That's not what's being asked. That's not what is even necessary at all. What is necessary is for each of us, wherever we are, to get one step more curious. So if you tend to talk to nobody, talk to somebody. If you are really uncomfortable talking about reproductive rights and Roe v. Wade and abortion, okay, pick another issue. Pick an issue where it doesn't feel quite so rough. So it's about that. There's a wonderful thinker, John Powell, who talks about building short bridges. That you don't need to bridge with the devil. Don't start there. Just build the short bridges. And the shortest bridge that you can build, the easiest way to begin practicing curiosity that makes longer bridges easier later, is just to get curious with yourself. And you don't even need to have a conversation with another person and put yourself into such a vulnerable position if that's how it feels. You can go online, and next time you see a headline that represents a perspective that feels really threatening to you, but that is a popular one and widely held, then open that article and ask yourself, what are the deep down honest concerns that this person, this writer, is trying to express? What are the deep down honest concerns that I can see? And then maybe ask yourself, what's the strongest argument on their side? Now, you sort of framed things in an interesting way. You said like, if people don't believe I should have reproductive rights, I think is one way you put it. Or if people hate me, and don't, what was it? Something about LGBTQ rights. So part of it is also being curious about how we are framing these things, right? Like I've heard people say around vaccines and vaccine mandates, they don't value freedom. That side of the mandates debate doesn't doesn't care about freedom. Really? Is that really it? Is that really what's motivating people who prefer, there to be vaccine mandates, that they don't value freedom? That's unlikely to be true. And so we also need to be curious about how we are labeling and what kind of motives we assume, are underneath somebody's opposition to some policy or apparent opposition to all of us. Like, are they really opposed to everything we are? Or is there something we're missing? If we went and we got a little more curious, we might find out that no, it's not that this person doesn't believe you should have reproductive rights. They look at it very differently. The locus of their views is somewhere completely different. And so walk their path. And again, you might completely disagree and you'll end up in conclusions that are just wildly opposed. But you might find that they're not motivated by something as malevolent as you assume.
Mm-hmm. The frame is so powerful as you're describing it. And it seems like it's so much about how we're using language to describe these things to create that frame. And it's so intoxicating to create these frames that really the other people and paint them, make them out in our minds to be more extreme than they actually are.
Right.
But we really have more commonality and shared values underneath the surface. So I remember watching a documentary film maybe a couple years ago from Braver Angels, where there was a group of reds and a group of blues that came together, maybe about like 10 or so on each side. And, they couldn't be more ideologically opposed, but they spent, I don't know, like a weekend together. It was almost like a retreat sort of atmosphere. Can you tell us about that experience and what people learned and what came out of it?
Yeah, so that was the experience that started Braver Angels. When that happened, Braver Angels didn't exist. What it was David Blankenhorn and David Lapp and Bill Doherty, who's a renowned family therapist, getting together and saying, oh my gosh, this 2016 election is tearing everything apart. What can we do? And so they ended up getting 10 Trump voters and 10 Clinton voters together in a church in South Lebanon, Ohio. And they went out, they talked to people, they kind of interviewed them and understood, would you be willing to try this? And then Bill helped moderate that session using methods he's gleaned from years of marriage and family therapy. And so it's this integration of what we know about what keeps couples from divorce, the kind of understanding, the kinds of reset buttons, the kinds of space that you have to allow for people to see each other as human and to understand where each other is coming from. That's what that workshop was all about. I recently talked to Bill. I was in Minneapolis, which is where he lives, and he told me more about that first workshop, how afraid they were that it was just not going to work, that it was going to blow up and be a total disaster, and then how it wasn't. It was not a disaster. And in fact, they thought, oh my gosh, more of this has to happen. More of this has to happen. So within months, they did a bus tour and they just got a bunch of other folks who seemed interested in this, and they started bussing around the country. And that's where some of the first Braver Angels alliances started. So we have 74 local alliances across the country, cities and towns today. And now there's, I don't know, upwards of like 50 offerings, different kinds of workshops for social media, for depolarizing within, for families divided by politics, our famous red blue workshop that's been studied by Brown University, all kinds of different structures and tactics to help people slow down and take a look at each other and get past their assumptions to the reality.
What other sorts of resources and experiences can people find through Braver Angels? You mentioned workshops. I know that you guys hold public debates as well. What else are the work is, cannot be understated how important this is. Tell us what else people can get involved with.
Yeah, well, I have to echo the debates, Braver Angels debates. That was basically maybe one of the biggest reasons I ended up working at Braver Angels. Is when I saw my first debate, it was March of 2020. No, it was April of 2020. And it was a debate about the lockdowns, which were very early at that point. And I could not believe the power of people's perspectives, the way that this structure set up at Braver Angels debates allowed people to be really honest and give their own perspective without getting attacked, without feeling defensive, and how all these people really were listening virtually from all across the country. And there were conservatives and liberals, and I couldn't believe it. How did they do this? We just had last Thursday a debate that we knew was going to be really difficult. And the director of debates, April Cornfield, has been telling everybody that it was one of the best experiences of Braver Angels that she's ever had. And it was about abortion and Roe v. Wade. So I have the video, sitting on my queue, and I've got to watch because everyone's telling me like this was, woo boy. Like, if you thought that there was no way that people could talk about this, they really can. So echo Braver Angels debates. The other thing that I'll mention is a new initiative called Braver Politics, which takes all of these methods that we know work on the grassroots level and brings them to the halls of power. So, so Bill has been going to DC, and a bunch of our other well-trained moderators have been going there. We've done workshops with sitting members of Congress. We've done workshops with their staffs. People often don't think about the staff members of our elected representatives who have to pick up the phone and hear constituents yell and be so angry. And what do you do with that anger? How can you listen for the concern deep down, right? How do you kind of tame that so that as an elected representative, you know what's going on? We've had candidates reach out to us, wondering what can I do to come into this climate right now in a better way? We're developing candidate debates, which are going to revolutionize the idea of a political debate. It's not going to be popcorn and like watching people hurl things at each other and big car crashes. It's going to be actual deliberative, understood paths that different candidates take to their views, so that citizens can actually make a good choice. So all kinds of exciting things happening there. And that's at braverpolitics.org if anyone wants to check it out.
Wow, I've got to follow up on this idea of having candidate debates. This is like a dream come true, I think, for so many people. Can you tell us more about what ideas you have in store for that and what that might look like?
The true answer is no, because I'm not on the team developing them. I know that there are there's a couple coming to Washington State. I'm not even sure how much I'm in Washington, but I'm not sure how much I'm able to say. But I think the simplest thing I can say is everything that we have learned from our workshops, everything that we have learned from the big Braver Angels debates, we're putting into practice in these candidate debates. And we have some extraordinary people who take debate very seriously, but also this collective search for truth very seriously. And so, by the way, I should have said this, but Braver Angels debates never declare a winner. It's not about who wins at all. So in that way, it's not really a classic debate. It is about the collective search for truth. So I know that all those things are informing the method and the development. So yeah, as we get closer to the elections, we're going to be seeing some really, really cool things.
Wow, I love that. And I'm so excited. I can't tell you how satisfying it is. I think the evidence that people want to hear civil conversation is in the fact that like podcasts are so popular. You have people will sit down and listen to, an hour, 2 hour, 3 hours of a podcast of people going back and forth on different ideas. I think there really is a craving out there for this type of, empathic conversation to happen.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you mentioned that Bill Doherty and others had gone to Congress, I believe, and facilitated some of these conversations. Are some people receptive to doing this depolarization work, and how has that generally gone?
Oh, absolutely. You mean people in Congress?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, that's, as a journalist, someone in the media a long time, it's been a really cool kind of wake up call to realize that there is such a difference between the stories being told about our politicians and the reality on the ground. For obvious reasons, it's the conflict that spreads and the conflict that gets stories told about it. But to give one example, there is a group of legislators in the U.S. House of Representatives that most Americans don't know about, but we all should. And it's called the Committee to Modernize Congress. And that's made up of 12 legislators, 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans. It's chaired by Derek Kilmer here in Washington and Charles Timmons in, I believe, South Carolina. and, they're Democrat and Republican, and their goal is to fix Congress, to fix it. And one of their number one priorities is the dysfunction of polarization within our legislative branch. All Americans know this, right? The approval ratings for Congress are abysmal. We don't expect very much from them. And the truth is, I've had these conversations with them as well. It's like nobody there thinks this is good. It's like, imagine going to work. It's one of the most toxic work environments in our country. It really is. And when you talk to them kind of behind the scenes, right, they'll tell you it sucks. It sucks to come in and have been elected to govern and to represent, and then to be in this stuck system where you kind of have to play these games, and you're not really sure that what you're spending your time on is actually serving your public. And then when you do things that serve your public, it appears not to be getting a lot of attention, and it is such a morass over there. So yes, are people receptive to this? Absolutely. They really, really are. USA Today, just in the last week and a half, I think, has written 2 national stories about what we're doing in Congress. So yeah, it's happening. And there are state legislators, there are mayors, there's people up and down, elected representatives all across the country who have really had enough. And in some ways, I told you in the beginning of this conversation that I kind of reached a point as a journalist where I said, I can't do what journalism is meant to do unless I step back and solve this problem, or at least try. And I think that there's more and more politicians doing the same thing, that they're sitting in office and going, welp, everything I'm trying to do is getting held back by this. So I have a choice. I can just kind of sit back and watch it happen, or I can lean forward and try to do something about it. And so, yeah, and Brave Angels is not the only organization, trying to help out. There are lots, but it's a movement, and it's growing.
My initial thought or belief was that some of these, senators and congressmen, mayors, et cetera, that they were maybe facing a conflict of interest between seeing this increasing polarization and not being happy with it on a personal level, and then maybe what actually served them politically as far as benefiting from increased polarization. But it sounds like what you're saying is that there are some people who are either A, recognizing that this is not healthy and we need to do something, or B, this actually isn't really serving me politically.
Yeah. I mean, it's not serving constituents. I think people know. I think most people kind of know that. Yeah. Like there are some politicians, we know who they are. I'm not going to name names, but there are some politicians whose whole brand is to be out there, rah-rah-rahing for their side. And unfortunately, what that means in today's media climate is that you are putting down the other side pretty significantly, and you are using some tactics that can be really dehumanizing and ugly. And, some of them are doing that. They're getting a lot of attention for it. Yeah. But they do not represent the whole. Yeah. So I suppose I have some empathy for politicians being a journalist, because I get it. Like I've had in my journalism career, there were several months where like my whole job was just to get as many clicks as I could on this one blog that I was writing. And I can tell you stories about some of the things that I did that I'm kind of ashamed of now, to try to get as many clicks as I could, turn up the emotion and sensationalism of the headline. Keep putting up a video that YouTube keeps taking down. Whatever it took to get on the top of Google Trends, I knew how to do it.
Right.
And it was gross, but it was also what got rewarded. I get it. I know how hard this is.
Yeah. So, I mean, outside of this small subset of people who are really love the rah, rah, rah and love the polarization, I agree. I think most people really, really yearn for, just something more sensible, and something that's more compassionate and brings people together. This might be a little bit more personal, but do you think that, in the next coming years, a candidate who's just more down the middle, or someone who can try to bridge the divide, is that appealing to people? I mean, to me, that I'm kind of watering at the mouth at the idea of someone who will, just for the sake of bringing people together, try to be sort of a middle candidate. But do
Mhm.
you think that there's an appetite for that, or are we kind of too far gone on these political
Well,
extremes?
I think it this is where it's good to make a distinction. So a lot of people look at this bridging movement, Braver Angels and all these other organizations, and they think that what we're trying to do is elevate the center. That the only solution to polarization is to elevate the center, the political ideas of the center. But that is not what we're trying to do. Um, so whether a more centrist candidate can survive or thrive, I think is a sign of how strong polarization is, because polarization is about polarity, right? Like polarization is about only the poles survive. So I would think that in any situation, in any circumstance, even outside of like our society's political polarization, if you see more things along a spectrum take root and take hold, it's a sign that you have a healthier, deliberative type of dynamic, right? Where it's not just about either or. And that, that's where we are now. So from that sense, it would be really cool. And I think there is a hunger for that. But for me, uh, the thing to be pushed is less about ideology and more about temperament,
Mm-hmm.
more about the how than the what. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what there's an enormous hunger for. So on the left or the right, I think that there's plenty of room for a candidate that has all the same ideological beliefs, but comes at the entire political experiment very differently.
Mm-hmm.
Not with guns blazing, not with exaggerations at the ready, not with this hypothesis that the only way to win, that all that matters is winning, and the only way to win is to exaggerate and do whatever it takes. And I think that's what people are truly just tired of, because we know that if you play out this movie, it will not end well. It's already destroying us. Like it doesn't work. So that's what I think. It's not about the politics, because going back to that distinction I was talking about, there really are severe political disagreements. They're not as bad as they look, but they're there. And we do need to not resolve them for all time, but we need to find the best balance for now. And in order to find the best balance in things like Roe v. Wade and abortion, my goodness, right? And things like guns, oh my God, we have to get better at seeing all of the stakeholders, putting all the concerns on the table, and having the kinds of leaders who can do that, who can mobilize people to be honest. And before they attack and judge, to just explain, to just describe what they're thinking. And once we have that, better policy becomes possible. Right now, we're stuck in this terrible place where policies are reactionary and reckless and mostly based on fear of the other side. I think that is so honestly like embarrassing, considering how smart and wise and amazing we all are. We're an extraordinarily intelligent, capable, connected society with so much to give, and this is the best we can do, really. you know we can't sustain that. It just does not reflect well. It just doesn't.
Monica, do you think that our politicians and our leaders underestimate the degree to which people would appreciate and actually support these types of behaviors and role modeling that you're describing? I really like the distinction between the how and the what. So as you're saying, it's not necessarily that, we would need a candidate who can conform their ideology to be in
Right.
the center to appeal to people, but someone who can be firm in their beliefs and their values, but model this process of trying to seek truth and understand the other side and be transparent and admit their flaws. Do you think politicians underestimate how much people would actually really like that? They seem
Yes,
so afraid to do that.
definitely. But here's the thing, is like right now, the best way that politicians and all of us frankly have to see each other at scale is media. And media is just right now not incentivized and not interested in telling these kinds of stories and revealing the reality of what people hunger for. It's just the grooves haven't been like built in yet for that. They are coming. I do think they're coming, but they're not there yet. And I've talked to several, politicians in DC who, they just kind of like sigh and go, we can only get on C-SPAN. There's just like, we can't get anywhere else with C-SPAN. You know what I mean? With this stuff. And so that's a problem. That's a severe problem. But it's also, it's not just a problem for the media, in the institution of the media. Like every day, I don't say things on my social media publicly that I probably should, if I wanted to be truly honest. Every day, like I refrain from sharing those opinions because I just get these signals that they're not welcome. It'll be too exhausting to try to have these conversations right now. And so what happens? We all cede the ground to the people who have been online, understanding what it means to be viral and to, scandalize and exaggerate. And they get rewarded all the time. They know what it means. They know how to hack our emotions, and they have the upper hand. So, those of us who are like, can we complicate this? Can we add some nuance? We're afraid of being attacked, in all the ways. And so we're creating this culture that keeps, I think, all of us from seeing the hunger that is really in our hearts for a better way, because modeling it is so difficult at scale. It's so difficult to champion it at scale. Even I wrote a book about this. Even I have a hard time. Like that's where we're at. So can't blame, politicians or anyone else for underestimating the hunger that's out there. It's being whispered. It's just whispers. It's in my inbox. It's in my direct messages, but it's not bursting out yet.
It's so sad to think about. So I have a question about misinformation. I wanted to get your opinion on this. So I wanted to pivot there, if that's okay with you, for a brief moment. So you wrote in your book, and I'm just going to quote here, "I'm done going along with the idea that if we could just rid the world of misinformation, everything would be fine, as if mowing down weeds would keep new ones from sprouting." Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah. Where to begin? You've got me all wound up.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. I have so much to say on this. It's really tempting to make this conversation all about facts. People either affirm facts or they don't, and they reject them. And gosh, what could be a better justification for judgment and dismissal than somebody not respecting truth, right? So there's a lot of people on both sides, I will say, who have ruled out folks who disagree with them because they're idiots, they're evil. They also just don't see the facts. They don't accept the facts. So, what we've been doing with all the best intentions over the last few years is trying to keep misinformation from spreading. And the efforts have been some of them have been really awesome and in some ways effective. But here's the problem. If all you're doing is disqualifying people when they don't affirm facts, that doesn't address what's really underneath it all, which is people's concerns. People's concerns about society, people's concerns about their lives, people's concerns about where the country's headed and what issues are going in what direction. That's everything. That's motivating everything. That's at the foundation. So every time that we say, all these people are censored, we're not going to write about this or that, we're not going to cover this or that, we're going to kind of demean and dismiss people who believe this, even though there's a lot of them, we're actually getting farther away from the real work. And the real work is listening to each other's honest concerns. Before we judge them, we have to listen to them. But every time we disqualify people from the conversation because in our view they don't agree with certain facts, or they're spreading misinformation or whatever, we're not only keeping ourselves from the real work, but we're also pushing those people towards spaces that are not going to be particularly diverse in their ideas. Like, every human has to be seen. Every human will be seen and heard, and if we don't see and hear each other, then people will find, they will find people who will hear them. They will go online and they will find somebody, and it may not be a very great somebody. And I think we've seen the results of that over and over and over again. It's like, if we leave each other to the jackals, we throw each other to the jackals, really, instead of coming in and listening and suspending our judgment long enough to understand someone else's truth, someone else's story. There's truth beyond facts. Come on, guys. There's truth beyond facts. There's deeper truths. So yeah, I can I got a little emotional there, but no, I really, really think that while it is so well-intentioned, and there's a lot, I think, to love about what we're doing, trying to tamp down misinformation, I would rather live in a culture where, where everybody listened to all the ideas and the good ideas bubbled up, than a culture that has to keep putting walls up all the time. One and another group, here's another group, here's another group. Now there's walls up against 100 groups now, and now it's 20 groups, and that's 10. I just don't think that's what we're built for.
Now I'm getting emotional. That was gorgeously put. I know that I could sit and talk to you here for many, many more hours about this and so many other topics, but I know that I have to let you go in a couple of minutes, and I can't let you do that without picking your brain on some very practical ways that we can have these conversations with other people in our lives. Let's just say, for example, we have a friend or a family member or maybe an acquaintance who we strongly disagree with. How can we start to have productive conversations with those people?
Yeah. So first off, I think you have to be in the right frame of mind, where you can truly practice being curious with the goal of understanding more than wanting to change somebody. If you are going to go into that conversation wanting to change somebody, they're going to tell, and it's going to blow up in your face. Don't do it. So now, we all want to persuade everyone else to go with what we believe. That's just human nature. We've chosen our own views because we think they're better. So of course we're going to want other people to agree with us. That's fine. It's more about whether you can come to a conversation ready to listen, to understand. So that's the first thing. If you are able to do that, the next best step is to approach this person and get their buy-in and actually declare the intent a bit. So, hey, Uncle Bob, I know that you and I disagree quite a bit, at least I think we do, on, abortion and Roe v. Wade. And I'm in a place right now where I'm feeling really curious, and I want to learn more about how other people view this. I have some strong feelings, as you probably tell, but I know that I should listen to other people's feelings too, and I really want to understand. So, do you have some time? Can we talk about it? Can I ask you some questions about it? And then see what he says. And if he says yes, great. Then make sure that you find a place that's comfortable and that there's enough time, and that you really are listening to understand. And so, among the things you can do to make sure you're doing that is, like, Uncle Bob is talking and Uncle Bob says something you don't like, and all you want to do is interrupt Uncle Bob. Don't interrupt Uncle Bob. So before you jump in with your opinion, ask another question. Ask a curious question. Tell me more about that. Okay, wow, that's surprising to me. Can I tell me when that happened to you? Stay with Uncle Bob. Stay with Uncle Bob's story for longer than you want. And a lot of pretty cool things will happen.
Absolutely love that. Well, we've covered a lot of really interesting topics today, but is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap up for today? I really, really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, totally. Just to, I guess, cap off a little more of the question on misinformation, I realized that I neglected to mention, the main thing that I think we need to work on is there's truth, and truth is everything. And as a society, we do have to have a collective search for truth. a conversation that involves all of us. The problem right now is that any conversation that's about the collective search for truth does not involve all of us because we're so fractured. So we have to get to a collective search for truth. And here's the thing. In order to make sure that that conversation involves all of us, we're going to have to build trust.
Yeah.
Building trust is a different process from building truth. Building trust means that you have to listen to someone without correcting them, that you have to hear them behind what you think, what to you is like a straight up lie. You have to listen to them behind that because you're working on something different. And we're not going to build truth until we build trust. And so that's the other thing about misinformation is let's not let that get in the way of building trust.
So well said. I mean, we started off this conversation maybe before we started recording by talking about this podcast and the idea of seeing us all as interconnected. And I mean, I love the way that you frame that. The people on the other side, I think we have to trust that they have some knowledge, some wisdom that we're not seeing, almost like we're reflecting each other's blind spots on both sides. And to prioritize and prize this process of trust building versus what we think as truth or as ideas, that reframe is so helpful, is so helpful. So thank you for adding that. Monica, so again, the book is, I never thought of it that way. Where can people find your book? Where can they learn more about you and all of the work that you do?
Yeah, so you can learn more about the book and myself at moniguzman.com or reclaimcuriosity.com. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and all the places at Moni Guzman, MoniGuzman, MoniGuzman. And I love to hear from people who are into these ideas. So please do reach out.
Fantastic. Thank you again for being here. And thank you so much for being you and all the lovely work that you do.
Thank you, Matthew.